All right, folks, we have a very special show for you today. My guest is extremely well known in these circles of biohacking and longevity and health optimization, none other than Ben Greenfield himself. As always, Ben delivers. Now, before we jump into the episode, I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank you for being part of the crew that's elevated this podcast and having us close in on close to 4 million downloads. Can you even believe it? I can't believe it. Anyway, please make sure that you leave us a review if you've never done that before on any platform that you're listening to this podcast on, because that's how we get all the review. That's how we get all these downloads, is by helping other people find us. And check out netnitum.com when you have a minute, because that's where you can learn about the membership community. That's where you can learn about the newsletter and sign up for it. We even have a peptide specific newsletter that you might be interested in if you're one of those people interested in peptides. So many good things. But above all, thank you. Thank you for being here. And thanks so much for your support. Ben Greenfield is in the house. And yes, he's bringing the full Ben Greenfield experience. You probably know Ben as a New York Times bestselling author, former Ironman triathlete, and one of the OGs in the biohacking space. He's coached everyone from execs to elite athletes and reaches millions every month through his writing, speaking, and podcasting. Today, we talk about the newly updated edition of Boundless, why he's ditched full-on keto in favor of a more Mediterranean vibe, and the peptide stack he swears by, right down to the oral BPC blends in his tea. He also shares how he reversed a concerning heart scan using a mix of lifestyle changes, low-dose statins of all things. Yes, you're going to hear Ben talk about statins, PCSK9 inhibitors, and some very dialed-in supplement stacking. Also, he once podcasted high on a homemade THC edible. Mistakes were made, stories were told. This one's classic Ben, smart, unfiltered, and wildly informative. You can find the updated Boundless book at bengreenfieldlife.com. Hey folks, just a quick reminder that all of the information presented in this podcast is for information purposes only. No medical advice, no diagnosing, no treatments suggested here. Before you try anything that you hear about or learn about here, make sure that you check with your medical provider. Ben Greenfield, welcome to the show. It is a pleasure.
Yo, what's up, Nat?
Yo. Not much. What's up with you? It's cold. So what's up?
I forgot. Where do you live?
I'm in Toronto.
Okay, yeah, that's good. Sometimes people say that and they live in freaking mid-Florida and it's 40 degrees.
I know, but they're all so excited over there right now. They get to bring out their Ugg boots and actually think that they need them.
Yeah, how cold is cold for Toronto?
It's pretty cold. I mean, if I was going to convert, do you speak Celsius or Fahrenheit?
Both, I suppose.
Yeah, so Celsius-wise, it sounds much more impressive. We're in the minus 10s, minus 15s, but I think when you convert to Fahrenheit, we're around 7, 6, 8 degrees.
That's solid. That's respect. That's free cryo.
Yeah. Well, exactly, right? So do you feel you have to cold plunge when you have weather like this, or do you just go roll around in the snow?
I just moved into a new home that I've been building for 3.5 years 2 weeks ago. And one of the things I wanted to do was that my podcasting studio, my office, my lounge, a man cave, everything in my previous home in Spokane, Washington, and I'm now in North Idaho, was connected and part of the main home. So now all those areas are disconnected, but that means every time I go into my office, which because I work from home is like 20 times a day going back and forth, from the kitchen to the office, from the bathroom to the office, etc., I go outside. And it's like a wind tunnel, the area in between the main home and my working area, because we live on kind of like a windy prairie and we haven't planted a lot of trees yet. So wind chill factors probably, since I moved in, been about 5 to 10 Fahrenheit going down that wind tunnel. So I get like 20 bouts of 15 to 20 seconds of a huge burst of cold. And I tell you what, like from the time I wake up all the way up through the afternoon, I don't need a cup of coffee or a stimulant or anything. I'm just awake and alert. And I totally think that counts. So no, I'm not doing a lot of cold plunging, just lots of, I suppose, cryotherapy microdosing.
I think that's amazing, right? Microdosing is a big thing right now in all the things. So I think that's pretty cool.
Yes.
And you get outside, you see the light. I have a deck off my third floor. I might do like stairs and go outside on the deck and come back down the stairs and just make myself use the bathroom upstairs.
Yeah. It's, you must radically change your environment to radically change your habits. So yeah, get a standing workstation, build an office with a cold wind tunnel, anything you can.
Yeah, well, I've got the standing desk. I've got the treadmill. Don't have the wind tunnel yet. Well, you never know. And goals, right?
That's
anyway,
right.
Ben, you are, you're a podcaster, you're an athlete, you're all the things. But at the end of the day, I think in your heart of hearts, you're a writer and you're an educator. Like this is I would guess.
You nailed it.
in where you are, that's what you do, right? Like, I mean, you have taken on, a lot of people write books, but there's these cute little books, single concept, that kind of thing. And you kind of took it on to write an encyclopedia. And now you've updated the encyclopedia, which I think is really interesting because the number of people that I talk to who have partially written books that they've never been able to hit okay, I've got it right. I've got enough. I'm going to publish this book. And so there seems to be this world in writing books where you've got to hit the sweet spot where you feel that you've updated enough. And in the knowledge that things are going to continue to evolve, you still feel good enough to say, okay, we're going to put this out there now. And
Seth Godin, who's wonderful in the publishing world as a resource. I believe he has a podcast now as well. He says at some point you must just press publish. And you need to realize that it might not be perfect. But I'm pretty happy when I put out a book these days, because usually, for something like Boundless, that's a 2 to 3 year long process. The revision and updating of this last one with all the new research, hacks, tools, et cetera, that was about 1.5 years. And in many cases, I'm writing articles, publishing them at Ben Greenfield Life, getting feedback from listeners, reading through comments, going back, tweaking, and eventually that article will live as a Google Doc that I'm then spending, for me, when I'm in writing phase, it's usually getting up around 4 a.m. and just being in my office until around 6:30 or so, or when we do our morning, Greenfield family huddle. So I'm typically locked away when I'm deep in the finishing phases it's usually around 20 to 30 weeks. And I'm tweaking and adapting those rough draft articles into actual chapters. And then each of those Google Docs for each chapter is in a drive. And then I've got a team where I'm telling them, hey, make sure this winds up in the resources section, check this research link to make sure it's still working. So then it turns into a collaborative effort. And then once it goes to the publisher, I get drafts. Like actually, it's in the trash can right now. I've got about 1,800 pages of drafts, which was the last draft I penned through. And then that goes back over to the publisher. I like to do my final edits with an actual written copy instead of on the screen. So I go through that with a pen, and then I go through all my marked, noted, folded over pages, and I'll either photograph them or go back into the document and transfer those notes in. Those go off to the editor. And even after all of that, there's still pieces where I'm like, oh, I should have put this in, or why didn't I include that? So yeah, you're right. At the end of the day, there's a little bit of reluctance as to whether or not it's the right time to finally put the finishing stamp on it. But I'm pretty happy. And I think if you're an author and you have a blog or a website, or you're prolific on, I don't know, Twitter, or you're writing educational captions for Instagram or your YouTube videos or things like that, you can kind of take solace in the fact that you're still able to constantly update those materials you put out in printed format on your other channels,
Yeah, 100%. I think that makes total sense. So in your new edition, are there one or two areas in particular where you're like, man, like this has moved light years from the last time I wrote this book? Like, are there one or two areas that you feel just moved the most? I mean, I'm sure there's been evolution in pretty much everywhere, maybe some a little less than others. Certainly ancestral practices by their very nature are ancestral practices, but at some level, Are there particular areas where you're like, man, this is like a whole new section?
The one that leaps out the most is the self-quantification chapter and the longevity chapter. And that's because, for example, with self-quantification, I went back to the drawing board and really took a deep dive into things that go beyond reference ranges. You know, everything from sodium, potassium ratios to, ratios of vitamin D, K, and magnesium, to a lot of markers that weren't being tested in the initial run, to what you'd look for on a heart health panel, et cetera. So I went way deeper than you'd find on most lab analyses in the self-quantification section. I'm super proud of that. That was like 4 weeks alone, just going through that whole section. And then for longevity, there's just so many new protocols that are super interesting that I put in there. One, for example, would be blood filtration, right? Since the initial writing, it's become increasingly accessible to do things like therapeutic plasma exchange or ozone plasmapheresis. Or I just got back from Mexico a few weeks ago where I did a full like oil change for the body via a filtration mechanism called the Serif 100, which was originally designed to remove pathogens and spike proteins from the body in a very thorough way. And it also cleans up a lot of other issues in the blood. And that's just a brand new filter. And there's another newer one called the marker that removes microplastics, glyphosate, other herbicides, pesticides, et cetera. So there's all sorts of new ways to, I suppose, use an old school word, detox the body. That the self-quantification chapter just exploded as well, not to mention new wearables, new ways of interpreting values and reference ranges like HRV, et cetera. So those two. And then a lot of newer protocols for mold and mycotoxin management, everything from higher dose phosphatidylserine IVs to intranasal peptide sprays like VIP for issues with biofilm in the sinuses. And I felt like the mold mycotoxin piece, because it's such a common problem, needed a lot of updating with better, more thorough protocols. So those are just a few examples. But yeah, I mean, every single chapter is pretty new and fresh.
That's awesome. That's amazing. So with the full, it's interesting you talk about these ways of cleaning out the blood. Like, we are finally getting into a world where, yes, we are detoxing the body in a different way. Like, we're literally able to reduce or lower the load of certain toxins and pathogens and things that don't belong there. Whereas in the past, if you were stimulating the liver, doing those detoxes, what you were really doing was upregulating the body's own detoxification systems, which is, of course, important to do on a daily basis. But how interesting that as we have new toxins and microplastics and stuff coming into our bodies that our bodies are not necessarily equipped to deal with, that we're now seeing the evolution of these strategies to kind of assist the body.
Yeah, you mentioned ancestral practices, and I don't want people to get the mistaken impression that you need to fork over the often intimidating amounts of cash necessary for some of these protocols. Like, you're looking in many cases at a few $1,000s said and done for ozone plasmapheresis, even more for therapeutic plasma exchange, $25,000 per day for a full blood filtration treatment in Mexico. And yes, if someone has severe Lyme, mold, long COVID, et cetera, those can really move the dial. But I have for years endorsed daily lymph circulation and detoxification protocols. For example, every morning I go into my lounge and I have a mini trampoline, right, which is pretty inexpensive. I jump up and down and I do self-inflicted lymph circulation while I'm jumping up and down. I got this protocol from Perry Nichols, who coined it. I think he calls it the Big Six. I rub and tap the areas where there's a large number of lymph nodes on the body, namely the clavicles. And you do it in this order: you do the clavicles, then behind the neck, then at the shoulders, then the stomach, then either side of the groin, then the backs of the knees. And you rub for about 20 seconds, then you slap for about 20 seconds. And I actually do that while I'm jumping down, up and down the trampoline. So I'm getting really good lymph circulation every day because the G forces on a trampoline compared to the lymph circulation you get when walking or standing on a vibration platform are the highest. And then I do a sauna sweat 3 times a week. And of course, I exercise and move, which in and of itself is fantastic for detoxification. I do breath work or heavy breathing during an exercise session. So that also helps quite a bit. And with all those modalities, that means not a day goes by that I'm not kind of cleaning out the body a little bit. And that's far superior to just letting gunk build up and then realize, hey, I need some, spendy detoxification protocol, in the new year or something like that.
Yeah. So to that end, did you feel a big difference when you did the big treatments? Because I would think that your baseline load is lower than the average person.
That's my problem is I do a lot of this stuff as an immersive journalistic stint to see what it's like and to look at things and check out how professional the company is, how safe it is, et cetera, before I might send a client or refer someone there. But all I noticed was a significant uptick in energy and being able to function really well on less sleep. And that lasted for about 2 to 3 weeks. Unexpected side effect was, I guess this might be a little bit of TMI, but significant improvement in sexual performance, libido, and erectile function, which I think was probably related because I did pre and post bloods, and some of the factors relating to blood clotting, blood flow, and even lipids improved quite a bit. So I suspect that there was either an increase in nitric oxide, an improvement in blood flow, or several parameters that allowed for that to happen. So it felt good, but you're right, I wasn't like sick going in. However, since then I have had multiple clients do that protocol, and several of them struggle with long COVID, and it just like disappeared afterwards.
No kidding. Yeah. That's impressive.
Yeah.
That's super
and
impressive.
That's what the filter was originally designed for. It was developed for pathogens and specifically for COVID spike protein related pathogens.
Yeah. So that's the $25,000 one, right? And so your typical client who's going in there with a pathogenic load, are they looking at two or three treatments over the course of a week?
You're in a hospital bed, laid out with a catheter coming out your jugular, which is a little bit uncomfortable. Watching all the blood come out. So, I just worked on my laptop. They got a TV in there, and you lay there for about 5 hours, and then you get wheeled in a wheelchair across a walkway to like this luxury hotel setting. And then you get up the next morning and they wheel you back over in the wheelchair and you do it again. And typically you do 2 to 3 days.
Wow. That's impressive. And you do those, and would they do them in a row or? Yeah,
all in a row, and the catheter doesn't come out. So you're basically sleeping on your back with this giant patch over your neck, and you can't put your head below your knees. You can't exercise. You got to be really careful lifting heavy weights for like a week or 2 after, just because you don't want to blow open that puncture basically that went into the neck.
Okay. All right. Well, not for the faint of heart, like many of the things that you do. All right. So let's go towards another topic that I think is really, as a matter of fact, it's such a big topic. You even did a whole solo episode about this. And this is about, for people in this space like me and you and anybody else who, is out teaching people and educating and sharing new things. We often have to go back and say, hey, I know that I've talked about this a lot and we've seen new research come out, or my personal experience has helped me to change my position on this. And so you talk in that episode about, I had the same journey with the ketogenic diet. There was a time where I was like, it's all about like, everybody needs to be keto. Keto's the way to go. It's anti-inflammatory. It's got all these amazing benefits. Your brain's going to be on fire.
Don't walk past an Italian restaurant. Yep.
Ever. Don't even inhale. And for God's sake, do not walk into a bakery.
Blueberries are the devil. Blueberries are the devil.
Yes. Blueberries and baked goods. And here we are today. And I think, I mean, you talk about in this episode where you've moved, even if you do visit keto land every once in a while, you've moved into a much more Mediterranean kind of version of it, which is where I kind of ended up originally because I am Mediterranean and I strongly believed that your ethnic background has a lot to do with sometimes with what you're going to do best with, right? Like what your people kind of had to deal with over time, over the generations, may have produced certain adaptations in your body that make you better able to deal with certain foods. But in your case, you know, I think that you talk about moving towards a more Mediterranean template.
Yeah.
That's the word I was looking for, towards a more Mediterranean template, partly because of the polyphenols and all the micronutrients and stuff, but also because of, and I think it was maybe related to the results that you got from your is it the Clear or Clearly test?
Clearly. Yeah. The CT angiography. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Maybe like this whole evolution that we go through and bringing our listeners and people along with us on this journey really of discovery.
Yeah, it's very interesting you bring up the eating according to your genetics. And a lot of people interpret that as getting one of these newer tests that tests a variety of SNPs and finding out, for example, whether you're a fat burner or a carb burner, or whether you might have a predisposition to familial hypercholesterolemia or something like that. But what you're referring to is more of ancestral genetics related to what your ancestors would have traditionally consumed in an indigenous diet.
Yeah.
There's a great book by Daphne Miller called The Jungle Effect. I interviewed her years ago. I went down to Berkeley and interviewed her on the back porch of her home. I read the book. I'm like, I got to hunt this lady down and talk to her. It's fascinating. You know, people in Cameroon, Africa have a high genetic risk for colon cancer, and yet over the years have self-selected a diet that, helped out by their environment, is rich in many fibrous foods and foods with citrus peel and those polyphenols and flavonols that you mentioned. And colon cancer manifests at a far lower rate in that native habitat with the native foods. And that same population's generations that came after that live in, for example, let's say the southeast area of the United States, where there's a higher consumption of fried foods, lower intake of fiber and antioxidants, et cetera, despite having identical genetics, manifest a much higher rate of colon cancer. Where you look at a Hispanic diet rich in low glycemic index carbohydrates, beans, maize, more complex starches, et cetera, along with legumes, beyond beans. And then you take that same population who, like the folks in Cameroon, have a high risk of colon cancer, have a high risk of type 2 diabetes, and you feed them in Southern California a diet that is more of a Western high fructose corn syrup, you know, soda, starches that are higher glycemic index type of intake, and they manifest those genetics that result in very high rates of type 2 diabetes among the American Hispanic population. She has multiple races in her book that she talks about when it comes to these genetic risks. So that alone is fascinating. But on a more personal level, I raced Ironman triathlon and was kind of an endurance sports junkie for years and years and years, right? So I'm like, my typical year, I was, you know, on a plane 12 times a year, flying all over the globe, racing for different teams, you know, packing bikes and wetsuits and shoes and energy gels, and traveling to Thailand and Japan and Hawaii and Vietnam and all over the world racing. It makes travel now very easy, right? For me to get on the plane and fly somewhere with a backpack and a carry-on to go like speak or attend a conference and not have to like take apart a bike and reassemble it in my hotel room, pack wetsuits, you know, check 2 bags, arrive ready to like race for 10 hours the next day. Like travel is a breeze compared to that. But
no kidding.
Of course, as a lot of people are aware, you know, endurance sports is a largely aerobic activity, although there are some anaerobic surges when you're racing. But based on the nature of the aerobic activity, folks started to talk, you know, heavily influenced by folks like Tim Noakes from South Africa and the doctor who was at University of Connecticut at the time, Jeff Volek, about this idea that maybe we need less of a carb throughput for a largely aerobic activity. And this was at the same time that folks like Mark Sisson were talking about the ability to eventually turn your body into a fat burning machine that burns a higher percentage of fat at both rest and exercise by adapting the body to higher fat intake, lower carbohydrate intake. Now, at the same time, young researcher named Dominique D'Agostino started to show up at different conferences presenting posters. I remember I talked to him at an old ancestral health symposium. He was like standing in the corner. I think his one subject in his research study on ketones was Peter Attia riding a bike, one of his friends. And I later had a lot of conversations with Peter Attia because when I met him, he was doing, fasted 24-hour bike rides and heavy in the keto hole. And so Dominique was making this idea not only of ketosis popular, but the idea of even using things like exogenous ketones and MCT oil and the like. Dave Asprey was also becoming very popular at the time. And of course, with bulletproof coffee, MCTs, later C8 and caprylic acid, and a lot of the information he was putting out on mitochondrial optimization in a slightly lower carbohydrate, preferably high ketone state. It was kind of this conglomeration of interest in ketosis that got me, very kind of plugged into all of this at the same time, interested in how this would flesh out in something like endurance sports. So I gradually shifted my diet from the traditional, 60 to 80% carbohydrate intake diet with gels and bars and very sweet, honey, fructose, maltodextrin, et cetera, consumption while racing, to a lower carbohydrate, more ketogenic approach. Because these ketones burnt in a carb-restricted state or generated in a carb-restricted state, high-fat state, and generated even more with the consumption of these ketones is the preferred fuel for the heart, the liver, the diaphragm, the brain, et cetera. And I started getting really good long-term aerobic energy results with much less bloating, gas, indigestion, blood sugar spikes, poor glycemic control, et cetera. So I became kind of a keto enthusiast for a while and, introduced a lot of these ideas into the endurance sports world. Not that I was the only one. Many others were starting to use this concept at the same time. And I was pretty strict keto, Nat, for like 3 years,
that's a long
70,
time.
80% fat, lots of nuts and seeds and butter and MCT oil and coconut oil. And even though they were expensive back then, like ketones were like $1,500 a bottle. And
they tasted horrible. I mean, not that they taste great now, but they tasted horrible.
You get like ketone IQ for $5.
Exactly.
But I was successful from a performance standpoint, but over time, my microbiome shifted and problematic gut issues began to persist, likely due to the low fiber intake. Yes, I was getting butyric acid from butter, and I was taking some probiotics to try and alleviate that. But yet the gut, after a few years, it's as though it started to morph, and the ketogenic diet paradoxically began to result in similar issues that people are trying to avoid when they're eliminating, like starchy carbohydrates and sugar and fructose and the like. Yeah, I developed hypogonadism, probably not helped at all by the fact that I was, a chronic cardio endurance sports athlete, which of course suppresses testosterone in and of itself. But then you look at glucose being necessary for Leydig cells in the testes to produce testosterone. So that suffered. My TSH was through the roof. It's like 7 or 8, which is pretty high. So I basically had, induced hypothyroidism. And I realized that despite it perhaps being a performance hack for aerobic exercise, strict ketosis, aside from medical management of, let's say, a dementia-like condition or diabetes, may not be ideal, especially for a hard-charging athlete. So then I started to use more of a cyclic ketogenic approach, where I would, eat low carbohydrate for most of the day, but then I started doing refeeds in the evening. Some of this inspired by someone more in the strength and muscle gain training sector who had developed a program called Carb Night, where you just don't eat carbs all day, and then you have like apple fritters and pizza and hamburgers and more of like a calories in, calories out, if it fits your macros type of guy. I'm blanking on his name. It was John somebody, I think. But anyways, he had developed Carb Night. You could Google it. It probably still exists. And I felt really good. I was already aware that food quality is important. So my refeeds were more like they are now, right? Purple potato, sweet potato, yam, dark chocolate, yogurt, a little bit of red wine, beets, carrots, parsnips, really good sourdough bread, white rice, etc. And the advantage of that is I was refilling my carbohydrate stores. There was enough to go around for glycan formation in the joints, for thyroid, for testosterone. And I felt a lot better on that approach. Yet, back when I don't really test ketones now. I try not to fret too much over things like that, but I was using the Keto Mojo, measuring ketone values, having, ketone values well above 3 most of the day. Because again, remember, I was still pretty heavily exercising at that point. And I felt really good. The carbohydrates helped with serotonin production and subsequent melatonin production in the evening. And then you're also kind of in fat burning mode all day long. And some people will point out the fact that in the morning, due to the natural surge in cortisol and the awakening response, you are more insulin sensitive in the morning. And they'll say, well, why not have all your carbs in the morning instead of in the evening? And that's true, but the fact is, this is where kind of biohacking comes in. It's not that difficult to induce a state of insulin sensitivity prior to that evening carbohydrate feed. What do I mean by that? You could take berberine, you could take bitter melon extract, you could take dihydroberberine, you could have a shot of apple cider vinegar, you could time a workout to occur or end in the couple hours leading up to dinner, you can do a cold shower, you can go on a walk after dinner, or there's all sorts of things that you can do to stave off that blood glucose response that might be greater in the evening when eating carbohydrates versus in the morning. Yeah. So basically, I shifted to that protocol, started to introduce, more fiber because I realized, these starchy fibers, they really aren't the devil. My blood glucose is not getting out of whack with this approach. Introduced more antioxidant. My gut started to feel better. My gut testing, those lovely stool testing results where you poop it in the hot dog tray and put it in the FedEx bag and keep it in the refrigerator and tell your family not to open the FedEx bag.
Whatever you do.
And my biome gradually became much more diverse with this approach, and still is, very diverse when I do these gut tests. And it was not diverse at all on a ketogenic diet. And so now it's even better because you, like we were talking about earlier, can get these liquid ketones and you can kind of sort of have your cake and eat it too, right? So I can have like blueberries in my morning smoothie and some white rice with lunch, have ketones, still have that stable energy source. The ketones in the presence of carbohydrates can also stabilize blood glucose values and limit glycemic variability. So, now, like you mentioned, I eat more of a cyclic low carb, I wouldn't say full on ketogenic, unless you count the fact that I'm inducing ketosis via these liquid.
It's different when you're doing it through exercise. Like you're just burning the carbs, you're using them up.
Right. So I'll use like a cyclic ketogenic approach, rich in fibers and a wide variety of vegetables, do the carb refeed at night. And I feel fantastic with that approach. So when it comes to the heart health piece, like you mentioned, probably due to years and years of like masochistic endurance training, and now I mostly walk and play pickleball and frisbee golf and lift weights with my sons and do a little sauna and cold, right? Like that's kind of my routine. Yeah. But I went in for a CT angiography, which is a test for plaque in the heart, about 4 years ago, and I had concerningly elevated values. Granted, not all plaque is created equal, right? Some of it was stable, and you do tend to see tight, stable plaque or calcium deposits in athletes, and they need to be less concerned about these. But some of it was unstable. Some of it was unstable in the LVA, the widowmaker, which is where it might break loose and actually cause a myocardial infarction or a stroke. So then I started to think, well, gosh, like it's very unlikely that this is induced by a low carb Mediterranean diet. Highly likely that it progressed through high saturated fat intake, massive levels of total cholesterol, LDL, ApoB, LP(a), very high levels of exercise and inflammation, way beyond the so-called Goldilocks zone of exercise. So even though I'm not contributing to this now, I need to think about what to do to reverse this. And at the time, I was not bullish on statins at all. I didn't know much about PCSK9 inhibitors, which can increase the number of LDL receptors and decrease LDL, especially that circulating in the blood, which might become atherosclerotic or contribute to that plaque formation. And I also was unaware of a lot of things that are more natural that are highly effective for heart health. Red ginseng, nattokinase, all three forms of vitamin K, magnesium, infrared light, right? There's a whole list of things, and I talk about them in that podcast that you mentioned. And so my plaque scores have been decreasing as time has progressed in the past 4 years.
Nice.
Now, I want to mention that you don't want to get a CT angiography every 6 months or so. You're subjected to a pretty significant dose of radiation on a test like that. And yes, you can take iodine afterwards and limit some of that. Iodine is one of the few compounds out there that can help with radiation exposure. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, there's another test called a carotid intima media thickness test, which is a very simple ultrasound scan on the right and the left side of the neck to visualize the carotid, which correlates, depending on the practitioner that does it, with anywhere from 90 to 99% accuracy to a CT angiography. Nice. So this is a way to kind of keep track of plaque without necessarily going in for a heart scan that your doctor might be a little bit reticent to order anyways. So there are websites like vasolabs.com, VASO, where you can find a good practitioner who can do a CIMT. So long story short is my levels have decreased remarkably. Well, what did I do? First, after discussing this with multiple doctors, including Dr. Darshan Shah at Next Health, Dr. George Church at Fountain Life, who did my initial CT angiography, and looking over their patient data, low-dose statin, right? Yeah. Rosuvastatin and ezetimibe at 5 milligrams and 10 milligrams. I might have that backwards. Check the research first. But it's a low-dose statin combo. I did that for a year. I simultaneously began to take a PCSK9 inhibitor, which is a twice-a-month injection. It's not inexpensive, but with my insurance, my out-of-pocket was about $250 a month, which not for me bad. To have the peace of mind that I was, as I think it was Dr. George who described it like this, melting away plaque based on large subsets of patient data that they had. He's the one who really convinced me on that piece. And then Darshan Shah, I remember a dinner in Hawaii where I literally had printed out journals and he was going through them with me and pointing out, the actual efficacy of statin in a male with pre-existing plaque and how that actually was a pretty good research proven option. And so I did that. I stopped the statins after a year, after all of my levels normalized, except the ApoB, continued on the PCSK9. Now the scores are fantastic. I do also take nattokinase, ginseng, not to toot my own horn, but actually I talked to Dr. Shah, who had started a new company called Vitaboom. And I said, let's take all these things I'm buying from like 20 different places, like Designs for Health, Vitamin K, which is also fantastic in the lineup, by the way. Vitamin D, magnesium, ginseng, nattokinase, niacin, blood flow precursors, et cetera. And let's just like put them all on one packet. So I worked with him to develop this product called Heart Health by Vitaboom. So I take that in the mornings. It's like a morning dose and an evening dose. And then I do the PCSK9 inhibitor. I'll probably stop the PCSK9 inhibitor pretty soon. And
I was going to say, how long do you do that? Yeah. Like, that's not a forever thing, right? It's when you see your values improve kind of thing.
I'll go in for another CT angiography because it's been a year and a half this summer. Yeah. And if it's looking pretty good, I'll stop the PCSK9 as well. So I know a lot of people will say, statins are horrible for you and they're going to, strip the muscles of coenzyme Q10, et cetera. But obviously, in the case of medical management, sometimes you got to rob Peter to pay Paul. And it's not as though you can't take ubiquinol or coenzyme Q10, or even better yet, and Dr. Barry Tan has great research on this, a full spectrum of vitamin E, mixed tocopherols and mixed tocotrienols from the annatto plant, that sparks your own endogenous coenzyme Q10 production. And he has new research showing that that's a superior way to decrease coenzyme Q10 stripping that results in response to taking a statin. So you can literally just take something like annatto extract. Designs for Health
has it. Yeah.
Designs for Health even has one that also puts extra ubiquinol in it. I think it's called annatto E, something like annatto E plus ubiquinol, something like that. So long story short is that, I've shifted away from a ketogenic diet. I've addressed heart issues with some of the approaches I just described to you. And my scores are looking really good. It's just nice to get the results of a lipid panel. And everything is just like, usually it's like green, yellow, red. Everything's green, 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 green. ApoB is yellow. And I feel pretty good about that.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. But, I think what's important, the important takeaway here is that what you used statin for was as a strategy to get yourself out of let's say, very low below baseline, and you used it in conjunction with other strategies so that it didn't become, it's a little bit, it's not the same, but it's a bit like PPIs, right? You can strategically use a PPI in a very acute situation, but change the diet, heal the gut, do all the things, and then come off of it, versus the way that they traditionally are used, which is, oh, you have GERD or heartburn, here's a PPI and we'll see you never, kind of thing.
When
It's
usually
a different approach.
it's a microbiome issue usually, but sometimes it gets so out of hand or whatever. Someone's using so much nicotine. That's a huge problem now. So many people are into nicotine. They got heartburn, esophagitis, risk of esophageal cancer because,
from the esophagitis,
guys like Tucker Carlson. I'm just like, I don't know how healthy his esophagus is going to be in 10 years with the apparent dosing of nicotine that he does. That's just one thing, eating too quickly, et cetera. But yeah, even these acid blockers have a time and place.
Yeah, no, exactly. So, I think the takeaway is really, with drugs that we often demonize or are often demonized in this whole biohacking longevity space, whatever you want to call it, it's, can we find the way to leverage them and to use them in a smart way to our advantage without using them as a Band-Aid for a certain solution? And I think that's what we all talk about all the time. But you've just described a very elegant kind of multi-year approach to going after a problem that most people are like, there's no solution to this. All you got to do is take your statin and, eat low fat.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to pharmaceuticals. I began using low dose testosterone about 3 years ago. Just a small cream or a small amount of cream I apply scrotally morning and evening. I take about 75 milligrams of lithium a day. Dr. Sandra Kaufman turned me onto that. Fantastic.
I was going to say, you sound like Sandra Kaufman right now.
for mental stability, for anxiety, like it's wonderful. And it's also great for bone density. My wife also takes 75 because she has a high genetic risk for bone density. She's very lean and kind of has the, pardon the expression, bird bones. And so she takes lithium also. And I have a stash of modafinil that I'll use for long-term travel. I have Valium that I use for long-haul plane flights. Now, obviously, those are pretty few and far between. That's for, really big bouts of travel or big bouts of sleep deprivation. And, then I have the PCSK9. I was on the statin. So, yeah, I'm not totally against, pharmaceuticals when there's a time and a place.
Yeah, no, I think it brings us actually to this place of, where nuance becomes so important and digging into the details. And, I think we're in a world where, in the social media world where the soundbite is king, and how we help to guide people to kind of go deeper, to go past that line. And it's an ongoing, we'll call it project. But listen, I really wanted to kind of dive a little bit into a mutual interest that we both have, which is in this space of peptides and peptide bioregulators. And I think that people, you've been talking about them more and more over the last few years. And I'm curious from your perspective, where do you think it's all going, kind of thing? Because I think that, my thoughts on BPC-157 are that it's this incredible pleiotropic compound that can do so much in the body. And I wonder sometimes, is it like one of the blocks for it ever hitting mainstream as a medication? Because it just has so much bandwidth and potential. Is it because it's so pleiotropic, because it has such wide ranging effects on the body that a pharma company is going to be like, well, because they like to create things that only do one thing typically. Yeah. And, with BPC, you get a lot, right? Yeah. You get all the different, for the brain and the musculoskeletal system and the gut and the inflammation and the pain and all the things. And so I'm curious about your angle on this. Like, what are your thoughts in terms of the future of some of these things?
Well, it's my understanding it's largely unpatentable as well, which doesn't make
that too
very interesting to pharmaceutical companies. And yeah, you're such a conspiracy theorist, not with the idea that pharmaceutical lobbying might be one of the factors behind the up and down illegality or classification of peptides. But whatever the reason is, I am a fan. I know that you talk a lot about peptides and peptide bioregulators, and I don't want to bore your audience, but just, my own approach is that I've increasingly become a fan of orally bioavailable peptides. I know Kyle from Level Up Health. I think you know him.
Yeah.
I've got a pretty good stash. It's easier to travel with the needles. I use his BPC. I use his gut repair formula about 4 times a year. I go through a whole bottle, right?
Yeah,
Just to basically take it in surges for gut healing, for leaky gut, etc. I use his TB500 fragrance and his KPV for inflammation, for muscle repair. He has a new one that's a blend of about, I think, 7 different neural-related peptides, including Cmax and C-Link.
Yeah, I just started using that, the Neurogen.
Breaking open those capsules and putting them in my morning cup of tea.
Oh, lovely. That's a nice delivery system.
Yeah, and I feel great on that. Then I think the peptide I've been most impressed with recently, maybe because it's cold and flu season, there's a lot of sickness going around. For a while, I recommended epitalin as not only something good for the mitochondria, but also an immune supporting peptide.
Yeah.
But thymosin alpha-1, a thymus gland related peptide, that is something I now have a stash of no matter what, if I'm traveling or if it's like the cold winter season. I mean, I had a friend recently who became violently ill and dosed him with 1 milligram of TA1, and he felt better within like minutes and was feeling fantastic the next day. It is wonderful as an immune supporting peptide. It's probably one of my favorites right now. And then a few others that have very noticeable effects. 5-amino-1-MQ for workouts, especially for strength and power related activities. I have a few people, including some very well-known actors who I've prepared for movie roles, specifically that involve being ripped, for lack of a better word. And I have them on a tesamorelin in the morning, CJC 1295 in the evening combo, 5 days on, 2 days off, typically for about 12 weeks. And I also run that cycle myself 1 or 2 times a year. And that one's fantastic. The only one I don't like that's also often championed as incredible for not only increasing metabolism and causing mitochondrial uncoupling or heat production, and also for the fat loss component and the appetite control component is tesofensine.
I'm not a fan.
I've taken an SSRI a few times just to see what it felt like literally a friend's antidepressant drug, because sometimes I'll just guinea pig stuff in myself and felt horrible. Like can't sleep and weird dreams and shaky and anxious. And I get a little bit of that from tesofensine. So that one's not super high up on the totem pole. And then the last thing with the peptides, there was one other that I was going to mention as I was talking about tesofensine. Maybe I'll remember it later. But anyways, I'll come back to it if I remember.
Yeah, no, that's a lot of really interesting stuff. Well, while we're on the subject, I guess, and I'm curious, what's your opinion on the GLP-1s? I mean, everybody's
that's funny. That's what I was going to mention.
That's what you were going to mention.
We're on the same
wavelength.
I'm like,
he hasn't mentioned a GLP-1. Oh my God.
GLP-1s are fantastic. Unfortunately, they're dosed at too high of volume, and you can get very powerful appetite suppressing effects and similar to BPC-157 pleiotropic effects for blood pressure, for heart health, for blood sugar management with a very small dose of, say, semaglutide, or the one I used was tirzepatide. So I experimented with it just because I have so many people asking me about it. I did about a 4-week protocol using about 1/10 of the standard dosage with no increase in dosage, once a week injection. Not only did I lost muscle because I didn't eat enough. I didn't want to eat. I'd sit down to like my blueberry smoothie or my ribeye steak, and I just wasn't that interested in it.
EAAs, my friend, EAAs.
I don't like that because I like to eat and I didn't like not enjoying food. Maybe that's why some people get depressed on GLP-1s. But also, interestingly, a lot of times, because I wear this blood glucose monitor, and sometimes you wake up at night and you'll find that the reason that you woke up at night is because your blood glucose has dropped. Sometimes because you have cortisol management issues. Sometimes you didn't eat enough carbs for dinner, back to that. I wear this blood glucose monitor, and sometimes I'll wake up at night and it'll be at like 50 to 60. Usually that's at like 1 to 3 a.m. ish. And I'll be like, oh dude, I need to go. And then I'll go eat and go back in bed and sleep like a baby. Right. Yeah. I'll just go, munch on a pear or have a handful of blueberries or a little bit of honey, and I'm fine.
Yeah.
So when I was using the GLP-1, I noted that my nighttime values when I'd check my blood glucose monitor in the morning were like in the 50s and 60s, and I was sleeping like a baby. So there's something about it limiting the sympathetic nervous system response to low blood glucose that seems to be beneficial also, which is nice if you're just trying to eat less, but you're one of those people who struggles with sleep when you're eating less. It seems to be very effective for that as well.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I mean, look, at the end of the day, you're a super lean guy. Like, you don't need a GLP-1. So it's going to, your body's going to go after whatever it can. You just don't have that many reserves. So I think that, I talk a lot about the GLP-1s and how to use them properly. And I think the how to use them properly piece is really important.
Yeah. And Dr. Tina Moore, by the way, great resource for that. TYNA.
Yeah, I have her on my schedule. She's coming up.
Oh, great.
I was on her podcast a little while ago. So,
she's awesome.
Yeah, she's lovely. I have a lot of time for her. All right. So we touched on the peptides a bit, and our last topic of the day. How much time do we have left? Not a whole lot. We're coming up on time.
I've got a couple minutes.
You've got a couple minutes. Okay. So we're skipping a whole other topic. We're going to have a part 2 to this because I got lots of other things I want to talk to you about.
Fair enough.
I want to finish off with, we talked a lot about what's worked and this and that. Why don't you share? Let's have a little fun here. What's the biohacking experiment that you did that backfired dramatically in your world, or maybe one of them, because you've been at it long enough that there's probably more than one.
Usually for me, it involves improper volumetric dosing of a supplement. Like I've overdosed on growth hormone. I took 10 times the amount because I mixed up that CJC bottle wrong.
Ouch.
And took a lot and was just basically almost felt like I was going to go into a full body spasm and my body broke out in sweats. And this was like right before dinner, and skipped out on family dinner and went and laid in bed. And, so make sure you mix your peptides properly, use an online peptide calculator, and understand that you don't need much.
Do the math.
Go back to the 10 tick mark, and you're like, that's nothing. Pay attention to that. I have taken a microdose of LSD before a massage to help with me coming up with new ideas as I laid there getting a massage, but accidentally took like an acid trip journey dose. So I'm laying there getting my massage, and every time I close my eyes, all I can see is like cartoon characters beating each other up with sledgehammers. And went to bed that night. I'm laying in bed with my wife. I'm like, babe, I think my brain is broken. And then eventually I realized what I'd done. And so I just put on an eye mask and some good music and laid there for about 4 hours.
Right. Enjoy the ride.
Great synesthetic music. There's not a lot really that I've done that has been that damaging. Usually, I guess the last one that's funny. I mean, it's all the same category, but I used to have a sidekick for my podcast where we do Q&As. And this was back in the day when I was getting really into like making my own edibles, because I went through a period of time where I was into weed. And so I made edibles, and I made one that I had designed to be like a little blood flow precursor, some caffeine, some energy, some green tea, and like a microdose, like 2 milligrams of THC. I'm like, I'm going to take this for the podcast. We're going to be funny. It's going to be incredible. And I got my dosing off because I was like decarboxylating my own leaves and, and mixing it all up myself. So long story short, I took 20 of THC rather than 2. And you can probably still go back and find the episode. I think we've entitled it When Ben Gets High or something like that. But we get like 15 minutes in, and all of a sudden my voice slows down and I start to stutter and sound really sleepy. And we keep going for a little while. And then there's long pauses after my sidekick, his name was Brock at the time, was asking me questions. And we get like 30 minutes in. I'm like, dude, I'm going to go to bed. And I just backed out. We came back later and finished recording the rest of it. But yeah, for me, even my wife chuckles sometimes. She sees me mixing some up in the kitchen. She's like, you sure you're doing that right? I'm like, babe, I got this. But you can't quite get mad at her because you got like this history of, maybe being in a rush and taking too much of something. So that's probably about all I got for you as far as crazy stories.
All right. So we're going to wrap this up, Ben Greenfield. I think that we got lots of cool little nuggets in here for people. If we were going to leave, and I mean, you get this question all the time. I'm sorry, it has to be done, or I'm going to get called out by my audience. Okay. If you could leave the audience with 3 nuggets that you think everybody needs to know or put into practice, bring it, please.
3 nuggets. That sunshine was getting to me. 3 nuggets. I would say make sure that you calendar time for relationships and family, because many of us are hard charging high achievers, and your business will eat you alive unless you have identified stop points and end points for that. Like tonight, I've got family tennis. I guarantee when I'm supposed to leave the house at 5:40, I will want to still be working, but I got 3 other people waiting for me to play tennis, and that's just all calendared. Family meditation, family huddles, family dinners. So that really keeps me inside my boundaries for work. That's one. Number 2 would be if you have a lot of struggles with getting up early because you feel low on sleep, use my habit, get up super early, but then take a really short lunch, book no meetings between like 2 and 3 p.m., do an afternoon siesta, then get up and crush the rest of the day. It's incredible. Nice. I really, really love that strategy. And then the last one would be to pray. I think we often live in a very scientific, rational era in which we think the idea of talking to a higher power who is hearing us and who is helping us is something that's silly or outdated or quantum or not proven by science or whatever. But I take a lot of both confidence and comfort in the fact that I can pray to my creator every day and talk to God. And if you haven't done that or you're not doing it, just know that he's listening, and you don't have to know how to pray. You can just do it, and God's listening. So those are my top 3 tips for you.
I love it. Well, tip 1 and tip 3 really cover what was going to be our third topic that we didn't get to. So thank you for that. Yeah. I think they're often the forgotten pieces that we get that get a little bit lost when we're, as you said, hard charging people, whatever it is you're working on. So Ben, thank you so much. This has been a pleasure. I mean, we've crossed paths many times, but we haven't gotten a chance to sit and chat like this before. So this has been great. And not that I think this is necessary, but we may as well. Let's tell people where they can find you, your amazing podcast, where they can get a copy of the updated book, the whole 9 yards.
Geez, Google, ChatGPT, BenGreenfieldLife.com. Go to BenGreenfieldLife.com. If you subscribe to my newsletter, you'll get all the goodies sent to you whenever anything new comes out, including the book.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Ben. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Awesome, Nat. Thanks.